We're going to compare all of the Tamron zoom lenses for Sony full-frame cameras. I've used all of these lenses over the years. Some of them I used to own, some of them I still own and use on a daily basis, but one thing is for sure with the Tamron lenses is that you get incredible performance for a really good price. So if you're watching your budget and you want good performing glass for Sony full-frame, then Tamron lenses are something you really should consider. One thing I really like about all the Tamron lenses, except for two of them, is that they all have a 67mm filter thread, which means you can get one size filter and use it for basically all of your lenses, except for two, which we'll get into in a minute. They're all very well weather sealed. They all have a nice little rubber gasket here, and I have tested the weather sealing very hard here in Alaska, both in rain and in way below zero temperatures, and all my lenses have performed flawlessly all the way through, regardless of the temperature. Most of them are fairly simple design, meaning they don't have a lot of buttons. A few of them have some buttons and switches. We'll show those as we get into them. And the later models and newest generations come with this little USB-C port here, which means you can upgrade the firmware, but you can also program the lens, including the switches and the focus ring, to do certain things. You can change this, the way the focus ring responds, as far as if you want it to be a linear response or a non-linear response. You can also change a lot of times how many degrees you have to turn the focus ring to be, to move from infinity focus to near focus, which is really nice. All the Tamron lenses are made with this same sort of durable plastic, but the later generations came with this more different bit of finish here. Now, I've found that even the early generations have held up well. These later generations seem to be holding up even better. And like I said, I've tested the durability of these lenses beyond what I think probably even Tamron ever expected when they designed these lenses, and they have performed flawlessly. So if durability is a concern, don't worry about it. These lenses have been great. I've also never had issues with dust getting inside the lens, even though most of them are a telescoping or a zoom that moves in and out as you zoom in and out. So if you can see here, most of them move in and out, but all of my lenses have stayed dust-free on the inside, which is important if you're operating in dirty, dusty locations. If you want to go more in depth on each of these lenses, each one of these lenses I did an individual review on. They'll be linked in the description, along with affiliate links if you want to purchase one. The Tamron 28-75 was my first Tamron lens for Sony full-frame glass, and it worked really well. Now, it's not as wide at 28mm as a 24-70, but it also goes just a little bit further at 75. Now, obviously, it is an extending barrel, but the whole lens is still really small and lightweight, and it is an f2.8 aperture all the way through the zoom range, which means it works fairly well in low light. This is actually a pretty good gimbal lens because if you balance it about halfway out, about 50mm or so, you can zoom out to the wide end and zoom into the long end without having to rebalance your gimbal because the lens is so lightweight. We're at 28mm. Now we're going to zoom in all the way to 75. There's 75mm zoomed in, pretty good. This is nice because it is a fixed 2.8 aperture all the way through, so you get good low light performance. Obviously, low light's not an issue today. This was the only lens that I shot with for about a year until they released the 17-28. And if you're looking for a good lens that will do pretty much everything from sort of wide to a little bit zoomed in, then this is a great one. I've used this for interviews, I've used this for landscapes, I've used this for all my YouTube videos for the first year I shot and filmed YouTube videos, and it was and is a solid performer. Now, they updated this with a Generation 2, which is the version I have here, with the USB-C and with the programmable button. So it gives you a little bit more options than the Generation 1. The Tamron 28-75 retails for $900. Sometimes you can find it for a little bit less if you find a sale, but overall, this is a fantastic performing lens for a lot less than similar types of lenses on the market. At $800, the Tamron 17-28 was an absolute game changer for me because now I had a small, super compact, and very lightweight, but also affordable wide-angle lens. So this was great for gimbal work, or is great for gimbal work, because it's an internal zooming lens and it's fixed at f2.8 all the way through the zoom range, so it works well in low light. In fact, I did a lot of astrophotography with this lens, and it performed really well, even wide open at f2.8. Now, every lens, when you stop down a little bit, it does get a little sharper, but the 17-28 is a great performer across the board. And like I said, because it's internal zooming, you get really good performance on a gimbal because there's basically no weight change. To start off with, this is at 17 millimeters. I'm filming in 8K 30 because I don't want there to be any crop at all. So this is full frame. And then I've also got stabilization set to standard, which means just the built-in mechanical stabilization is working, no active stabilization, so there's no extra crop there. Now we're gonna zoom into 28. There's 28 millimeters. Now, if you wanted to go 16-35, which is more the traditional length or focal range, you have to go a lot larger than this, and I think that's why Tamron went 17-28, because it kept the lens much more affordable and it kept it really small and really lightweight. If you pair the 17-28 with the 28-200, you have a massive amount of zoom range in two lenses that comes in at under or right around $1,600, which is fantastic for the performance. The 70-180 from Tamron is kind of their offering for a 70-200 f2.8 fixed all the way through the zoom range equivalent. Now it's smaller and lighter than almost every other similar lens. It has a nice lock switch here, keeps it from moving when you don't want it to move, and it gives you f2.8 from 70 all the way to 180, which is pretty nice. So here we are, we're on the 70-180, we're at 70 millimeters, which if you'll notice is just a little bit wider than 75. But now we're gonna start punching in all the way to 180. So there's the 70-180 at 180 millimeters. Are you gonna miss that extra 200 millimeters at the long end? That depends on you. I found that really by repositioning the camera a little bit, it was no problem to get a very similar framing to that full 200 millimeters. And if you're using Sony with the APS-C zoom option, then you can just zoom right in there. But this is a really good lens that I used a lot for shooting conferences, for shooting speakers on stages, because it does give you really great image quality and just great focus and really solid performance out of a lens that costs significantly less. This comes in at $1,200, so it costs significantly less than most of the other 70-200 equivalent lenses that are out there on the market. But the photo quality coming out of this is spectacular. You can even get these really crazy, really close bokeh looking, very macro-like shots using this when you put it in manual focus and focus it all the way as close as you can. This lens can give you some really interesting results. But if you're looking for a high quality f2.8 for filming interviews or anything like that, the 70-180 is a great option for you. Again, it's also weather sealed, so it works really well. And I can tell you that I've tested that as well, and the 70-180 works great. The 28-200 is perhaps one of the better all-in-one zoom lenses. If you're gonna take one lens with you and go and try and film or take photos of everything, this is a great option. It's really affordable at about $700, $730, depending on when you find it. It also has a lock button here so that it won't zoom in or zoom, come out on you when you're traveling. So this is the 28-200 at 28 millimeters. Again, all the settings are the same. So you can go from 28 all the way to 200 millimeters right there, which is pretty dang impressive. This is a fantastic, really versatile all-in-one zoom lens. In fact, when I did the review of this, I inadvertently ended up being part of a rescue of a climber and sat in all kinds of weather with this lens on my camera and basically filmed and took photos of the entire thing once the rescue was underway. And yeah, this ended up being the perfect lens for that because it was an all-in-one zoom. Now, it doesn't have an f2.8 fixed aperture all the way through. It starts at f2.8 and then about 35 millimeters, it jumps from there and starts jumping up and goes all the way to f5.6. So while you're at the wide end, this will work well in low light, but then as soon as you start zooming in, you start losing stops of light relatively quickly. However, I think this is probably one of the best lenses you can buy for under $800 for an all-in-one lens on your camera. The image quality is excellent. It's very sharp and really clean. You get great photos out of this and really good video. And of course, the autofocus tracking is also really good out of this lens. And then if you use Sony's APS-C zoom, you get an additional 100 millimeters, which means you basically get a 28 to 300 millimeter lens, which is fantastic amount of reach. If you're looking to jump into wildlife photography, or you just want something that has a lot more reach, then the 70 to 300 from Tamron might be the way to go. Because it comes in at $550 or less if you can find it on sale, and the performance of this lens is really quite good, even though it's really small and very lightweight and compact, you get a tremendous amount of zoom range for a lens of this size. So here we are at 70 millimeters on the 70 to 300, and this starts off at an aperture of f4.5 and goes down to f6.3. So again, not the best for low light, but also gives you a fair amount of range when you're going to be zooming in. So here we're going to be zooming in all the way to 300 millimeters, which is right there. So that's 300 millimeters zoomed in, which gives you a pretty good amount of reach, as you can see here. Overall, for the amount of zoom you get on this lens, this gives you a lot of reach in a really small and lightweight package, which is great for me because I hike around a lot. Now, it does start at f4.5 and then go to f6.3 when you're zoomed all the way in, but because Sony higher ISO performance is really quite good and fairly noise-free, it doesn't really affect the use of this too much, even though for wildlife, you're generally going to be shooting at higher shutter speeds. The 20 to 40 is the newest lens on the market from Tamron, at least at the time of recording this video, and it's really specifically aimed at people who vlog. So you have 20 millimeters when it's zoomed out, and then 40 millimeters when you're all the way zoomed in. And it is an f2.8 fixed all the way through, which gives you great low light performance. This is a really small lens. It's very lightweight and compact. So like for me, I've had no trouble balancing on a gimbal at 28 millimeters and then being able to zoom in or out all the way. It is relatively simple. You have a focus ring, you have the zoom ring, but you do have that USB-C port, which gives you the ability to program the lens to do whatever options it can. So you can change it to a linear focus or a non-linear focus, and also change how many how many degrees you need to turn it before it goes from infinity to close focus. This lens does have a really nice close focus ability, and it's a really great performer for just running around, walking, and being able to film everything. 20 millimeters is actually, I find, perfect for hand holding shots when I'm filming myself, or even for tripod locked off shots. But if you want to get just a little more compression, you can zoom into that 40 or 35 millimeters and get a little bit more where that background is made to be a little bit bigger and more right-sized in comparison to your subject. Overall, this lens is great if you do a lot of talking to camera, but you also want to be able to punch in a little bit, but you really only want to take one lens with you. The 20 to 40 gives you a lot of options in a really small, lightweight, compact package. The 35 to 150 is perhaps the best lens that Tamron has released. Now, this is not a cheap lens. It comes in at about $1,900, and it has been incredibly difficult to get a hold of because it is just an incredible, well-performing lens for a great price and a very unique focal length. So here we are at 35 millimeters on the 35 to 150. Nice, wide. It gives you a really nice, just general kind of shooting lens at 35. Not too wide, but wide enough. And then as we zoom into 150, you can see you actually get a fair amount of reach out of this lens, which is great for kind of all-around shooting. But what makes this lens very unique, aside from the focal range, is the fact that it starts at f2 and then goes to f2.8. So at f2, 35 millimeters, by the time you hit 50, then you're at f2.8 through the rest of the focal range. That gives you stellar low light performance with a really pretty great telephoto lens that can be used for a lot of different applications. 35 millimeters is a really nice focal length to start off with, especially if you're doing tripod shots or locked off shots, but you want a very good kind of blown out bokeh depth of field, or you're filming in low light. And because it goes all the way to 150, you can zoom in, punch in, and capture a lot. Another thing I love about this lens is it's basically parfocal, which means you can set the focus, and then when you zoom in, or you set the focus when you're zoomed in and you zoom out, the focus plane stays the same. Another thing I love about this lens is it has very little, or basically no, focus breathing, which makes it a great lens, especially if you're doing things like weddings or events where you want one really high performing lens that you can put on your camera, run around and film everything. It does have a lock switch on the side here to lock it so it doesn't go in and out when you do it. It has a customizable button that has a couple positions, 1, 2, 3. And then it has this customizable switch here, which you can change to be a lot of different functions, and an autofocus, manual focus on off switch. This lens is perhaps my favorite lens that Tamron has come out with. Not cheap, but an exceptionally well-performing lens for what you get, and a very great package for being able to do events and weddings and just a lot of things because of the focal range. Now, this is one of the lenses that Tamron's released that has an 82mm filter thread. So you have to have a larger filter thread or larger filters for this. But aside from that, this lens is absolutely spectacular. The 50-400 actually became my favorite super telephoto lens that I have, because recently Tamron did a firmware update which significantly improved the focusing performance. This lens is absolutely great. Now, it is f4.5 to f6.3 at the telephoto range. So it's got a locking switch, it's got a couple of customizable buttons, and this lens does have vibration compensation built in, which is Tamron's form of lens-based stabilization, which works in conjunction with the in-body stabilization in Sony cameras. It does work well when you're out at 400mm. No matter what, you're gonna have to have pretty steady hands to be able to get something or shoot at much higher shutter speeds, but every little bit helps. So here we are on the 50-400. We're at 50mm. All the other settings are exactly the same. And this gives you an idea of how wide it can be, which is, you know, pretty good, not too bad. And now we're going to zoom all the way into 400mm and give you an idea of how far in that can zoom. There's 400mm on the 50-400. Because it has customizable buttons, and you can also customize somewhat how the VC works, what kinds of VC. You've got, you know, your general kind of all around, and then one that's more suited for panning, and then you can turn it off. And then it also has a customizable button. But this lens has become one of my favorites because it's also still, for a really telephoto lens, fairly small and lightweight and compact, and much easier to throw in my backpack and take with me places than say the lens that we're going to talk about in a bit with the 150-500. Has the USB-C port, fully weather sealed, so it seals really well. And yeah, this lens has been fantastic for going out and shooting a lot of things. Because it starts at 50mm instead of the typical 100mm, then you also get that extra width. So if you're going to do tripod shots, like this shot right here is actually at 50mm, then it gives you a lot of options for how you want to compose your shot. Overall, this lens, especially since the firmware update that Tamron just released, this lens has been spectacular. Now, it is a larger lens, and it does not come with a lens collar, but you can get a lens collar for it if you want to. I haven't found it to be an issue when I'm shooting on my travel tripod from Peak Design with the Sony A1, but overall, yeah, this is a great lens. And it also has the 67mm filter thread, so if you have other Tamron lenses with the 67mm filters, then you're good to go with this one as well. Now, the 50-400 retails for about $1,300, unless of course you find it on sale, which I think is a great deal considering that any equivalent focal length lens, or you're going to be spending probably maybe almost twice that, definitely in the $2,000 range or more, and the performance out of this is absolutely fantastic. The Tamron 150-500 is definitely kind of the go-to lens for any sort of wildlife stuff. Now, they just released an update for this lens as well, which significantly improves the focus performance. I found the focus performance to be really good overall. This is also one of the only other lenses that Tamron's made for full frame that has vibration compensation built in. And it helps a tremendous amount when you're shooting wildlife, especially if you're shooting handheld. It helps a lot. So here we are at 150. And this is an f5 to f6.7, depending on, you know, if you're at the wide end or the zoomed in end. So it is not a fixed aperture, but again, this does give you a massive amount of reach. Now we're gonna zoom in all the way to 500. And there's 500. Aside from wildlife, this is another great example of having a really big, strong telephoto lens like this, is being able to zoom in all the way in and see, oh look, there's a little house up there that somebody used to live in. No idea why, but somebody used to live up there. You can see this is a very large and very heavy lens. This is also the other lens that Tamron's released with an 82mm filter thread on the top here, or on the front. And it, of course, has a locking switch so that the lens doesn't drift out on you while you're traveling. It has a focus setting switch to where you can go full range lens, infinity to 3 meters, and then in 15 meters to infinity. You can turn your autofocus on and off, vibration compensation on and off, and then you have 3 modes. So kind of an all-around mode, one that's more specialized to panning, and then one that's more specialized to photo shooting, which means it tries to hold the exact position while the camera is taking a photo. I generally find mode 1 to be really good. This lens does come with a lens collar, and it's a good thing too, because this lens is pretty heavy. When I did my initial review of this lens, I hiked 30 something miles with this and climbed a few thousand feet into the mountains of Alaska. And this is not a lens I would generally take hiking with me because it is so large, but it is a great performing lens. And I think overall for wildlife or for people who are filming or taking photos of birds, this is great because you have that 500 millimeters, which if you're shooting APS-C, then you can get all the way to like 725 millimeters or something like that, right? So something in that range. I'm doing the math in my head. This is a great lens. The other nice thing about this lens too is that you can zoom it to wherever you want to zoom it, and then it has a clutch. So you do that, and while you still can move the zoom ring, it's much more difficult. Where you do this, it's in and out real easy, but as soon as you engage that clutch by pulling the focus ring in or out, it makes it much more difficult. Now this lens doesn't have USB-C to be able to customize everything. I wish it did, and maybe Tamron will be coming out with a version 2 of this, but overall, the way this lens is made and the way it's set up is excellent for doing wildlife or anything you need to be really zoomed in on. So I've also used this on some conferences where I had to be way in the back of one of those giant ballrooms and I need to get a really good tight shot of the speakers on stage, and this lens worked really well, especially on a tripod. Now this lens retails for $1,400, which sounds like a lot, but when you consider the performance you're getting out of it and the price of similar lenses, it's actually a pretty good deal. So yeah, if you're looking to do a lot of wildlife stuff and you want really good high quality performance, but you don't want to break the bank or you don't have the budget for some of the other ones, then seriously consider the Tamron 150 to 500 because it's a great lens. Some of these lenses are available for other types of camera mounts, but for Sony full frame, especially for people who are trying to maybe squeeze everything they can out of their dollars, then I really think you should consider some of the Tamron lenses because they are absolutely fantastic and you can get your dollars to go a lot further for the type of performance you get. You're gonna wanna watch this video right here to see some of the best budget lenses for Sony full frame cameras. As always, if you have questions, ask me in the comments below, or you can join my live stream, which happens most Wednesday nights at 4 p.m. Alaska time, 8 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you again soon in the next video. Cheers.